Kia ora, welcome to episode 48 of the SWNZ podcast, the podcast for New Zealand Star Wars fans. My name is Matt.
And my name is Christy.
Another great week for news from a galaxy far, far away, so let's jump in and talk Star Wars. First on the list, quite obviously, is the Book of Boba Fett trailer. We weren't expecting this. It came quite unannounced and surprisingly, but there it was in our social media feeds when we got up this morning. Super exciting. If you haven't seen it yet, make sure you jump onto the official StarWars.com YouTube channel and check it out. We've also broken it down in a scene-by-scene screen cap gallery on SWNZ because as well as really enjoying watching the action, we like to really take a close look at the detail that's sort of hidden in the background and hidden on the characters and even hidden in plain sight sometimes. So there's a scene-by-scene screen cap gallery on SWNZ. You can go take a look at that right now. But let's talk about some of the things that we saw in this trailer. There's a few things that really stood out to me from the get-go. Almost all of the scenes seem to be set on Tatooine, so I'm assuming that most of this material is coming from the first couple of episodes from the trailer, so as to not give too much away. There's a very good chance we'll see a little bit more variety when the actual series comes out, but for now everything we see is set on Tatooine. The other thing that really stood out to me is that Fennec Shand has a very, very close relationship with Boba Fett. She appears to be working with him as a equal, as a partner in almost every scene, which really stood out, really came across in the trailer. But lots of fun things in the background of the trailer, lots of creatures. We see Fennec Shand, of course. We see Boma monks in the opening scenes. Lots of original trilogy characters, Ithorians, Trandoshans, Klatooinians, Gamorreans, Aqualish, some Tusken Raiders, and I actually think that they've stepped up some of the prosthetics and makeup on some of the creatures. The Trandoshans look better than the Trandoshans we saw in The Mandalorian. What sort of things stood out to you?
Yeah, I liked how much of Tatooine we get to see. We see Slave One flying through the sky. I love seeing Jabba's palace. It's been one of those sort of iconic Star Wars buildings, locations, if you will. But I wanted to sort of see more of the rooms, more of what's going on there. We sort of get glimpses of some of the bits and pieces, like when R2 and 3PO get sort of down to the sort of dungeony areas where the droid slaves and things like that are kept. But it'll be really fun to see more of that location in the modern era, sort of explore that. I love how we get just a sort of a slight look at what the storyline will be for this one. It looks like, as we got the indication at the end of The Mandalorian, he has taken over from Bib Fortuna, who obviously took over from Jabba the Hutt. So we've got this sort of new position of power and how that is going to sort of affect the underworld in terms of different factions and things like that, and Boba Fett sort of wanting to collaborate rather than rule with fear, as he says that Jabba did. So that's really interesting, and obviously every time there's a shift in power, some people may think, well, maybe why can't I be in charge? So obviously that's gonna, as we see in the trailer, there is some conflict going on there, so it'll be interesting to see. I get the feeling, as you say, that this is from just like one or two episodes at the start of it. It'll be really interesting to see if we go off-world in this series, or whether the action is going to be close and tight to Tatooine, because obviously Jabba was a central figure on Tatooine, but he was also part of the sort of larger sort of Hutt gang family, so it'll be interesting to see,
which is interplanetary.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see whether we go off-world and get caught up in all sorts of other sort of underworld stuff, but it's a super exciting trailer.
Yeah, so as you say, what we're seeing so far is his asserting his authority in relationship to the other crime lords and crime gangs of presumably Tatooine, but it would be interesting if he goes off-world to encounter other crime gangs, because some more live action Hutts would certainly be interesting. A few things that stood out to me is I love that it's set in Jabba's palace. It's a very cool callback to the original trilogy. We seem to visit a few other domiciles, perhaps palaces of other crime lords. The Ithorian crime lords seems to be set in a different location, for instance. And also the other thing that really sort of on that kind of note, I'm assuming the city that we're in is Mos Eisley. That Jabba's palace is sort of equidistant from Mos Espa and Mos Eisley, and at the time of Return of the Jedi and subsequently, I think Mos Eisley is one of the bigger settlements on Tatooine. But certainly in the prequel trilogy era, as I understand it, Mos Espa was a little larger, but power and population shifted a little bit. So, but it looks like we're seeing a very big version, a very dense version of Mos Eisley, or whatever Tatooine city that we are looking at there, and I think that's necessary in order to be able to tell lots of different stories and to be able to imply that there's this power tension between different crime lords, because if it's just small settlements, then it's not quite as interesting, not quite as dense, and not quite as much tension.
Certainly, if we sort of look back to A New Hope, where Ben Kenobi calls Mos Eisley the hive of scum and villainy, so that kind of would indicate that certainly in the sort of original trilogy and beyond era, that Mos Eisley has become sort of the main central spot for the crime bosses, the gangs, and things like that. So I feel like that's sort of playing into it. One other aspect that I thought was really fun was just how much of Turou we got to see in this trailer, that this isn't like The Mandalorian. He has taken his helmet off a lot, and getting to see his facial expressions. We see him fighting with his helmet off, so that's really cool that he is going to be front and center of this series.
Yeah, that's a very fun point. And my thoughts on that is it's leveraging his particular acting and speaking style, because he's got a cadence and a delivery to his voice that really just says, crime lord or crime boss in many ways. He barely needs to put any emphasis on anything, and he just comes across as someone who commands authority, and I think that really works well for him to actually play. I mean, he's obviously playing Boba Fett because of his history with Jango Fett, but I think in many ways he's better suited to this characterization of Boba Fett. It's perfect in that regard, and I love the fact that we saw many scenes with his helmet off, with his armor on, but his helmet off, so that he could really come through in it. And that's obviously very important when his fighting scenes, because he seems to be doing, trained up and is doing the fight scenes himself, relying heavily on his history and skills in traditional Māori fighting arts. And because he wields melee weapons, he wields clubs in this trailer almost as much as he does his E3 blaster rifle. And I think we'll see a lot more of that, and I think I get the impression that he actually enjoys that. Temuera enjoys that.
I guess seeing this trailer has kind of made me reflect on the fact that Boba Fett, as we know him in the original trilogy, is on the Empire's side. He is a villain in the story. He is the one that sort of, captures Han Solo and all of that. So it'll be really interesting now that he is the lead, whether we're going to sort of find out more about whether his time aligned with the Empire in that time, like whether he was doing it out of necessity, whether he's kind of more neutral territory, whether he's kind of more skewing good guy like we saw in The Mandalorian. Obviously in old sort of Star Wars stories, the bounty hunters were seen as the bad guys, but The Mandalorian kind of really showed us that they're just good guys. They're catching the outlaws, they're catching the people that broke rules or owed money and stuff like that.
It's almost bounty hunter is a profession, sort of in the grey area of society, but there's nothing to straight up say that they are motivated by evil intent or anything. They are straight up grey in terms of alignment, I think, and they can sway either way.
Because at the start of this trailer, he said that he's not a bounty hunter,
like that.
which I thought was a really interesting point. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of an interesting line to put right at the start of a trailer. Yep. Where is this going to sort of kick this off? And then later on, he was talking about, if we cooperate, we can all be very rich. So that's kind of interesting. He's not necessarily wanting sort of violence and to sort of, be running around the galaxy catching people. Obviously, he's a little bit older by this time, and maybe he just wants to sort of retire and enjoy the spoils of what he's earned with his career and a sort of a position of authority and power. So it's really interesting. I think that it looks like this trailer is super well received online. People are excited by the action, by the lines of dialogue that give us snippets to where this thing is going to go.
Yeah, well,
it's really
it's hitting
sort of
all the right notes.
yeah.
I mean, obviously, The Mandalorian works supremely well for Disney Plus as a launching title. But there's room for this to be bigger in some ways. I think it may well just be a sort of circumscribed series because of the way they're sort of intertwining the Mandalorian era series. We may just see Temuera turn up as Boba Fett in other aligned series rather than a continuation of the Book of Boba Fett. I hope we get more standalone seasons, but we'll see how that pans out. But this first season, or this singular season, whichever it ends up being, could be very, very big.
To me, this sort of feels like one of the very first pieces of sort of content in the Disney era that's taking a pre-existing character and creating more content around them. Obviously, in the prequels, we're much more centered on new characters. Yes, Luke, Leia, Lando, Chewbacca, they are in it, but they are not the lead characters. They're kind of scattered through it. Then we had Rogue One. Again, we had some pre-existing characters in it, but we were centered on new characters. Solo a little bit, but it sort of felt a little bit more removed because we had so many more characters. Yes, we know Han Solo and he's the main character, but it sort of felt further separated from where we see him later because it's more of a establishing story.
Yeah, young Han Solo is almost a different character to older, more settled in his ways Han Solo, and that was part of the intention of the Han Solo.
It's why he is who he is.
The movie.
But this feels like this is solidly taking a very beloved character that, albeit didn't get as much screen time in the original trilogy as perhaps other characters, but really sort of diving in and giving fans more of Boba Fett.
Yeah, and on that note of him being a recurring character, we're 10 days out from the Disney Plus Day Under the Helmet Legacy of Boba Fett special, and now that this material is out there, I'm getting a little bit of hope that we might actually see Temuera Morrison in that special and some reference to the modern era of Boba Fett as well as the historic era of Boba Fett. That's about 10 days time. We'll be talking about that in 2 podcasts from this point.
Especially since we know that this is kind of like talking about the legacy. We're seeing, the actors at conventions, we're seeing behind the scenes footage. So if it's intended to kind of introduce a new generation of fans to Boba Fett, it makes so much sense to link it to the new series so people understand everything. Even if it's just got shots from the trailer and not anything new, that would be enough to sort of really space it all together. I do really hope that we get a good amount of behind the scenes footage when the Boba Fett series is all wrapped up, like we got for The Mandalorian, because I really want to see some behind the scenes stuff. The trailer is really hitting home on just about every alien in the shot is an established alien that we know.
Character,
so it feels like they're really trying to keep that original trilogy flavor for fans.
Yeah, and they all seem to be actually related to specific crime lord factions in some ways. I think we seem to have a Trandoshan faction, a Klatooinian faction, a Aqualish faction, and perhaps an Ithorian faction as well. And I think that's interesting that they've specifically gone, like you say, for original trilogy created creatures. There were a couple of other things that stood out. The Twi'leks.
Yes.
So let's talk about the Twi'leks because that's very significant. We saw 2 Twi'leks there, a green Twi'lek and a human skin-toned Twi'lek. And the latter was actually, I believe, played by actress Jennifer Beals, who has a long history in Hollywood, going right back to, prior to, but mostly known for Flashdance in 1983, the Flashdance movie. So she's a well-established actor that's been working continuously. And I mention that because it does imply that this just wasn't a background character that we saw. They wouldn't use someone with that longer history and that larger filmography for a background character. I think we're going to see that Twi'lek character play a significant role.
Yeah, well, I'm always fond of Twi'leks. Obviously, they have this sort of first appearance in Jabba's palace with Ula. So that's kind of fun that they're pulling in that sort of underworld characters. We know that in the Clone Wars, we see things like the Twi'leks are often sort of in slavery. So it'll be interesting to see, now that sort of Jabba is out of the question, whether we see the Twi'leks kind of banding together and sort of forming their own faction, as it were, or whether these are going to be underworld figures or are they still kind of in servitude. I'm really keen to see where they go. Like you said, they're going to be major characters. It could be like the Twi'lek that was in The Mandalorian, played by one of the actresses from Harry Potter. So she was a fairly significant character for that one episode, so it'll be interesting to see if these Twi'leks have more of a role. But yeah, definitely very excited by all the aliens in this trailer.
I guess it's not inconceivable that she is effectively a quest giver, that she is recruiting Boba Fett to help out with some issues that the Twi'leks face on Tatooine, perhaps. Well, we'll see. So yeah, Jennifer Beals playing a Twi'lek in the Book of Boba Fett. And a couple of other little bits of trivia. I noticed that when Boba dropped his helmet and the coin spilled out, we got a moderately interesting shot of the interior of Boba Fett's helmet. We see some really interesting use of shield technology and the hand-to-hand or melee weapon combat, which was quite an interesting sort of new visual that we hadn't really explored in live action series to quite this extent. And like I say, I really love seeing all the original trilogy characters in the background, and even the Boma monks, even though it's quite distant in relation to Jabba's palace. The Boma monk is the spider droid. Most of you will be familiar with that showed up very briefly in the Return of the Jedi. the history of Jabba's palace. Has had a few different versions in Legends in the past, but I think it's locked in as the fact that Jabba's palace was originally a Boma monk monastery. Like I say, there's been a couple of different interpretations, but I believe that is locked in at this point. So we know that Boma monks still exist. I wonder if they will crop up at some point in the story, because it would seem odd that they're skittering around Jabba's palace but not referred to at any level. So 9 episodes of the Book of Boba Fett is the word on the street, and we know for certainty that it starts on December the 29th. We got that date a month or so back. Was kind of hoping for this side of Christmas, but we'll take what we can get. Still this year, still 2021, and it's November now, so we can say Book of Boba Fett is coming out next month. So that's the Book of Boba Fett trailer. Make sure you've seen it if you haven't already managed to. I'm sure most of you have. But also tied into that, directly related to that, is a start of a uphill incline of Book of Boba Fett and Boba Fett merchandise. And some of that has become available even in the last week or so. So, for instance, we know that just shipping from Mighty Ape has been a New York Comic Con exclusive Tatooine Nomad pop. So this is actually from The Mandalorian, but it's Temuera Morrison as first seen on Tatooine as Boba Fett. Now, even though he's not in Boba Fett armor of any sort at this point, I actually quite like this version of the character. And the pop vinyl version is obviously highly stylized, but it's still very cool. It was a New York Comic Con exclusive. It's sold out at Mighty 8, but it's still available for pre-order at popstock.co.nz. We're also expecting to see a Black Series 6-inch figure of this version of Boba Fett, which I'm quite looking forward to. And in fact, in the last few days, there's been a leaked picture of a whole, from a couple of ways actually, of upcoming Black Series figures that includes this Boba Fett from Tatooine, from The Mandalorian, but also a bunch of other figures: Bib Fortuna, Ponda Baba, Fennec Shand, Migs Mayfield, a Rogue One Jedha Trooper, which we kind of knew about, which I'll talk about shortly, and Dr. Everson. And the reason that it's significant when we're talking about Book of Boba Fett merch is because the Black Series Fennec Shand figure is actually the first figure we've seen with Book of Boba Fett branding on it. Book of Boba Fett merch is also showing up in different ways. It's showing up in digital format. In the Star Wars Trader app from Topps, we've got a new Book of Boba Fett series of cards just released this morning. They don't go into a lot of detail other than artwork showing Boba Fett and Fennec Shand together, but it's interesting, and I think it's a prelude to more content in that digital format. And also from last week's Bring Home the Bounty campaign in Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes, the mobile app, Boba Fett in his Mandalorian version has been introduced as a playable character. He's referred to as the Scion of Django, and he's available now, isn't he?
Yeah, he's available through Conquest, which is a little bit of a harder mode, where you can earn tokens for him, as opposed to the standard event release where you can just play a short event and get the character and then work on gearing them up. The more sort of legendary characters, the more sort of impressive characters in both lore and in the game tend to be given to us in harder methods. You really have to earn them. So it kind of is fitting that this new version of Boba Fett is going to be a harder character to earn. Boba Fett has existed in the game since launch or very shortly after. He is a very good character.
So that's the original trilogy version.
It's a classic version of Boba Fett, so this is a really cool sort of new version to put in there. He'll have new abilities and things like that to match how we see his fight styles in the new series, so that's really cool.
So the promotional material had him with his helmet off, so it showed Temuera Morrison's face on the character. Is that how it's rendered in the game?
Yes, he appears in the game with his helmet off, so it is Temuera's face with the new sort of armor as he wears it in these new series. He does appear with his face in sort of other iterations in the game, because obviously he is the face of Clone Troopers, so there are a few other Clone Trooper characters in Galaxy of Heroes that use his face. The in-game face for Wrecker from the Bad Batch feels one also very close to Temuera's face, but it's fun to have him fully in there. And considering some of the merchandise, I do wonder whether he's actually going to be having his helmet off for quite a fair chunk.
I've just mentioned a couple of instances where we see his face, the Black Series and the Funko Pop vinyl figure, where it's the Tatooine Nomad version where his helmet's off. But I really think that by the end of next year we'll have a lot of actual Temuera Morrison merch, which is a cool thing for Kiwis and a cool thing for fans of Tem.
It's kind of funny thinking back to the original trilogy era, even Phantom Menace, that we had no clue that there was going to be such high representation of a prominent New Zealand actor when we think that all the clones are essentially Maori, and then an iconic character like Boba Fett is played by a Maori New Zealand actor that's very proud and connected to New Zealand. So it feels like that Star Wars connection is strong to New Zealand as well. Obviously, there are certain New Zealand actors and Australian actors that become very Americanized and don't sort of have a connection to New Zealand. But we know Temuera spends a lot of time in New Zealand. So it's just really fun. And certainly from the merchandise point of view, it's really fun that he's getting his face used for such a prominent character. Obviously, it would have been a very cool feather in his cap to be the voice of Boba put into the original trilogy. So this is just another sort of continuation of that legacy.
Yeah. I mean, his history with Star Wars does go back, and it does extend beyond the prequel trilogy. Let's not forget that he's also the voice of the Republic Commandos, including Boss in the Republic Commando video game from a few years back now. Speaking of games, I just wanted to have a brief mention of some interesting Star Wars The Old Republic news. We've mentioned before that Star Wars The Old Republic is coming up on its 10th anniversary in December, which is quite a big deal. It makes it one of the longest, if not the longest, sort of supported ongoing Star Wars games. Star Wars Galaxies, from memory, got about 8 years, a little over 8 years before the plugs on those servers were pulled. But the reason I talk about this Star Wars The Old Republic and its 10th anniversary is that they are hiring staff. They're hiring in particular a development director. The team at BioWare on SWTOR is growing. They describe in an advert that they're looking for a development director with a background in narrative and art production to support the cross-discipline team that brings new Star Wars stories and content to life. They say that they've got a ton in the works for their upcoming 10th anniversary and beyond, and I think that's a very promising thing, a promising bit of news, even though it's come via a job advertisement. We're excited about the 10th anniversary of Star Wars The Old Republic, but we're also excited about the fact that there is ongoing support for it, that it seems to have a lot more life in it just yet. We know that the 7.0 release that's coming out in December does involve some tech enhancements, some back-end technology enhancements, as well as UI and front-end enhancements. Super exciting to think that it's going to keep on going well beyond its 10-year anniversary.
Yeah, I'm really excited that SWTOR is reaching its 10th anniversary. We've been playing technically a little over 10 years because we started really getting into the game during the beta testing, which was around sort of October, just prior to launch. So we've been enjoying this game for many years. We play it nearly daily, and we've just been really enjoying the constant new story, events, all sorts of neat gear and additions to the game. It's always giving us something to do. It's always giving us new outfits and speeders and weapons and all sorts of things. I really enjoy a lot of the Mandalorian themed things. You've got things like the mud horn, you've got the Mandalorian's outfit, you've got his Amban disintegrator rifle, which is a lot of fun in the game.
It's a tiny note. The Amban rifle in Star Wars The Old Republic is the first weapon they brought in that literally disintegrates your opponent, disintegrates your enemy. Up until now, everything just falls over dead on the ground. But they introduced a whole new sort of animation concept for that particular weapon in the game.
It's super popular, and I'm really excited that, as you say, from this job listing, it really does show that they have got grand plans going forward into the future. There's been events running at the moment, and there's just a ton of people on and playing, and it's been really fun. You can often see in chat people talking about latest Star Wars news and things like that, so it's really exciting. And I'm super excited to see that the magazine Star Wars Insider is actually recognizing SWTOR's accomplishment of reaching that 10th anniversary milestone. A lot of times when it comes to the video games, things like the Star Wars show on YouTube, they often tend to gloss over the Star Wars games.
Very high level at best, yeah.
They talk about some of the major events, and like even with Galaxy of Heroes, they don't often talk about new additions to the game. I don't think I've ever seen them talk about Star Wars Card Trader, and that's a very long-running app game. So it always feels super special when some of the sort of other Star Wars news outlets actually reference Star Wars video games.
So I'm sure when December rolls around and that 10th anniversary hits, we'll be talking about it in a little more detail, because that'll be interesting. All right, other news that we need to talk about. We talked about the Hasbro Pulse Con online event a few podcasts back. Almost immediately after that, they ran into the Hasbro Pulse 1027 premium online event, the 1027 referring to the 27th of October. I don't quite know why they had a couple of online events almost back to back like that, but they did. But the thing that's worth mentioning from that is they showed some new Black Series figures, and I've touched on some of these just a few moments earlier, but they showed nice detailed pictures of the Rogue One Jedha Patrol Stormtrooper, the Black Series with the pale blue band for the Rogue One series. A couple of Bad Batch characters. We've got Bad Batch Omega, which we knew were coming, but now we're seeing in hand and boxed photos. Omega comes with Ruby the Lizard, which is quite a fun addition, as well as her bow and arrow, her electro bow, whatever you want to call it, and Bad Batch Echo, and Return of the Jedi Boba Fortuna. So those are all coming down the line, and we've seen some pictures of those online. Other action figure manufacturer news, don't know a lot of details about this, but really very interesting that Japanese company Bandai look like they're going to be releasing some figures from Star Wars Visions. We don't know what scale these are, we don't know what price point they're going to be, but they have shown up on a non-English website. We can see some pretty cool sculpts of the Ronin character from the Duel and the two twins characters.
These are sculpted in a specific pose that kind of reminds me of like the Kotobukiya, in the sort of very fine detailed plastic that's fully painted. We don't know if these are static figures or whether they click together like some of the other figures in that, like from Kotobukiya. They especially make me think of the sort of artist series where they are in a slightly stylized pose. The Ronin figure in particular is depicted with his sort of cape in a sort of very a windswept motion. That's a sort of dynamic statue pose that you just don't get with action figures because they don't have to have joints and limbs that are posable and stuff like that. So I'm really quite intrigued to see more from this. I was always wondering whether we would see more sort of merchandise, not just t-shirts or a book or something like that. But yeah, I'm hoping that we get more solid information about these soon.
So Bandai have a solid reputation for very cool sculpts, and it's appropriate, it makes sense that it's coming from a Japanese company, and we may see these available to the international market at some point. The Bring Home the Bounty campaign continues. Week 4 will be announced tomorrow, but week 3 revealed a couple of interesting things, not tons, but a couple of interesting things. Of particular note, a Black Series 6-inch version of The Client from The Mandalorian, along with his Camtono full of Beskar bars. Star Wars Monopoly, again, I don't know how many versions of Star Wars Monopoly are out there. This is actually season 2 of The Mandalorian, so it's not even the first version of The Mandalorian Monopoly, so I kind of think they're milking that one a little bit. Some interesting apparel, Turtle t-shirts with some fun designs. Turtle do their very highly stylized cartoony characters on their shirts, but they're very popular. They show up at Armageddon conventions in New Zealand, but oddly they don't often bring Star Wars material to New Zealand when they do that. But you can order from tturtle.com.
They would normally ship internationally, but because of USPS snarling things up, you would probably have to use a freight forwarder to order from them. But when they launch new shirts, they are often half off for a limited sort of introductory price, which puts their Star Wars shirts at about $12.50 US, which is fairly reasonable. Standard price, they're usually around $24, $25. They all have a really sort of cute, sort of chibi style, but they do a full range. These new ones are slightly oddly prequel themed. They have been doing some prequel t-shirts, but they've also been doing some Bad Batch. I thought they would do maybe some Boba Fett or some Mandalorian ones, but I guess we'll see those down the line. But they're definitely worth checking out if you're in the market for some neat, varied Star Wars apparel that's different to what you see elsewhere.
Yeah, and also on the topic of new apparel, Bait shirts, also featured in Bring Home the Bounty Week 3. They've got some very unique custom Imperial designs featuring Imperial characters, TIE pilots, snowtroopers, stormtroopers and the like, Piker Scouts. I actually quite like these. Now, they do long sleeve shirts with graphics on the sleeves and on the back, as well as t-shirts with graphics on the front and back. They do ship, and they do ship internationally with UPS, so it should make it to us. And we'll put links to all of these if you haven't seen them on StarWars.com in the down bar below or on the SWNZ website. And finally, in terms of news, before we move on to local store reports, I just wanted to throw into the mix a little bit of speculation. Usually don't put a lot of stock on a lot of the rumours that are floating around. We've heard all sorts of ideas about what sort of Star Wars animated series might be next in the works. But one bit of rumour that has come through the rumour mill recently I think is kind of worth just throwing in there and perhaps even looking forward to. There's word on the street that D. Bradley Baker, Matt Lanter and Sam Witwer were recording for a Star Wars animated series together. Not clear, but there is word on the street again that this may involve Darth Maul and maybe an animated series sort of featured on the crime world, the underworld in the era of Darth Maul and Solo, a Star Wars story in the sort of Crimson Reign era. And one source even said that we might see Dryden Voss associated with that, which would be kind of cool. So not a lot to hang a hat on just yet. And as I say, there's lots of talk about possible and desired Star Wars animated series. And I think there's probably quite a few ideas that are being worked on at the moment, but this one I think is worth exploring, and it does bear some weight given that it is a area and a sort of set of characters that's been focused on in the Star Wars comics from Marvel at this point in time. Okay, let's talk about local store reports. Just a handful to talk about at this point. The HasLab Rancor, we've been waiting to see how many local retailers will show up from. At this point, it looks like EB Games is the only one that's going to make it available locally for us. They've got it priced at $7.99 with a $100 deposit at this point. I don't think we're going to see it from Mighty Ape because there's a narrow window for them to actually get it up on their website before the pre-order window closes for the crowdfunding campaign, and they haven't got it up yet. So if you are after the HasLab Rancor and want to get it locally, $799 is probably comparable to if you bought it directly via Hasbro and got it into the country via a freight forwarding service, plus or minus a few dollars, but at least if it's coming locally, you know that there's less shipping and less handling.
Yeah, I like buying local for high price point things like this with the variability of both shipping rates and shipping times and always the dreaded customs fees. Buying locally from EB Games means you know what the final price is. You're not going to get stung when it's finally time to ship. So it's good that we've got at least one local retailer locking this in for fans.
In the vintage collection, there's been half a dozen new figures that have been available for pre-order locally. There's the wave of 4 figures that features Ahsoka Tano, Mace Windu, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin from sort of halfway between The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. That wave of figures is available from a couple of retailers, including Mighty Ape and Pop Guardian. There was also a sort of double hit wave announced just in the last little while, and featuring a Death Watch Mandalorian and a Mandalorian version of Ahsoka Tano as seen on the planet Corvus. That is currently available for pre-order from Pop Guardian, and Mighty Ape seem to have the Death Watch Mandalorian but not the Corvus Ahsoka Tano for some weird reason, unless it was there very, very briefly and just sold out in the blink of an eye. Either way, you can find those new waves of half a dozen vintage collection figures from a couple of local retailers priced at $29 to $30 each. And the Navarro Cantina, also from the vintage collection in the 3.75 inch scale, is a playset that was announced as part of the recent Hasbro announcements, and that was available at Pop Guardian, but they sold out their allocation pretty quick. It is available from Mighty Ape and I believe from the top of my head EB Games as well. Both of them have it priced at $119, which is getting up there a little bit, but it is a very cool addition to your Star Wars display. These sort of modular playsets from Hasbro can, you know, be configured in a couple of different ways, and they do work well on a action figure shelf. Even if it's only a sort of narrow shelf, you can have it as just a background, or you can actually make it into a bit more of a three-dimensional playset.
The reintroduction of playset components in recent years kind of feels like Hasbro knows that fans have been using 3D printing or just sort of homemade builds to fill the gap. People like building scenes. If you're a loose figure collector, I particularly like seeing all the figures together in scenes, and having a few components kind of really fleshes it out rather than just action figures standing on your bookshelf. And certainly within the era of social media and toy photography, it really does go that sort of extra mile to have scenes and stuff like that. So I hope that this Cantina playset, along with the likes of the Jabba's Palace and the Tent of Corridor, is showing us a little bit where Hasbro might go in the future, that they're giving us these kind of wall components that can stand behind figures or put a couple together to kind of make a bigger scene, because it sort of feels like we've had that lacking for quite some time. I know not everyone's keen on them. They tend to be a little bit more expensive, but I really like them, and I definitely want to pick this one up for our collection.
Okay, so like we say, that was an exciting week. I think the Book of Boba Fett trailer just absolutely made the day for today, and really sort of hopefully heralds a progressive campaign between now and the 29th of December. So I'm sure we'll be talking about Temuera Morrison and the Book of Boba Fett over the next couple of months and the next few podcasts. But on that note, that's about it for today's installment. I guess we're done doing talking. If you have any thoughts on topics we discussed today, what are your thoughts on the trailer, for instance? We're definitely keen to hear them. Leave a comment on the YouTube page or our website for this podcast. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you taking your time to listen to us share our passion for Star Wars. Stay tuned to our website, SWNZ.co.nz, for Star Wars news for New Zealanders and another podcast episode next week and every Tuesday. Don't forget, you can jump on over to either our Facebook group or the SWNZ message boards to discuss all the latest Star Wars news with other Kiwi fans. Kia ora, kia noho haumaru, thank you for listening and stay safe.
Turou Hawaiki, may the Force be with you.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, go ahead and like the video, check out the SWNZ podcast playlist for our other episodes, and subscribe for alerts about new episodes. See you next time.